welcome starting into the new year. And
Hey, Happy New Year.
absolutely, and I'm super excited with this new year because I think back in 2024, you and I have talked at length about connecting and doing some type of kind of podcast and kind of brainstorming and melding and just literally getting to talk about things that we're passionate about, and a lot of it kind of in this immersive spectrum of immersive learning, the power of immersive learning, and the different areas that we've chatted about all throughout last year in 2024. And we're like, we need to record these things and we need to kind of capture our thoughts and our moments together. And so here we are, 2025, starting our first opportunity to capture our connections and our thoughts. Really, I think as we were talking a couple days ago, kind of the topic of, or the overall topic, the power of immersive learning. And so I think that's kind of what we're thinking. And we're just gonna kind of like talk into this, jump into this, and where we kind of go. And I think we're gonna talk about immersion, kind of
hmm
what that is, what that means, what it looks like, how it, I always tell my students, and we look at these kind of terms and things as I talk to students at Air University about immersive technology, is what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And so that's always kind of my guide when I talk to students about these terms and what we look at. So we're not just looking through one lens. But I think that's our goal is like, what is immersion? What does it mean? What does it sound like? What does it look like? How is it described? What are different aspects of immersion? Um,
I'm super excited, Andy, and I'll tell you, part of the reason why I'm excited is because there's so much application that comes out of our conversations, and there's so much opportunity today for people to begin creating immersive experiences, both for the purpose of learning and for the purpose of entertainment. But really, the low hanging fruit right now, and the first opportunity for immersion, I think, is in the training world. There's massive impact to be had, and it's not being adopted yet because people don't know it's there. They don't know how to utilize it. They don't necessarily know the positive impact that comes out of it. The simple possibility of scaling your learning and what does that mean, and us getting to talk about that. But the second thing that I'm excited about, outside of inviting people to begin doing some of these things, is to hopefully through the podcast potentially create a dialogue with the public, right? Where we can start hearing other people's experiences and discoveries, and invite those conversations into our own dialogue, man. I'm really excited about sharing and about learning. And you're such an exciting thought partner, brother. Over the last 4 years, the thoughts that we've developed along with Department of Homeland Security, and the application in the Air Force, the work that we've done with your classes, and even seeing what the chaplain college is doing with the Air Force
yeah.
and how they're looking to apply immersive learning. There's really exciting things to discover, and I'm excited to create a sort of a theater for people to be able to see what's happening.
Oh, and JJ, funny thing. So yesterday I had a meeting with the provost of Air University, um, and we really wasn't sure what the topic was. I was going in with to talk to the provost about. We sat down and she's like, Andy, what so why do you have my attention? I'm like, well, just this concept of immersive learning at Air University moving kind of forward in its future strategic direction for how university is going to look at immersive learning as an ecosystem for the different colleges and schools
Yep.
as they're creating kind of the policy and how we're going to bring in technology and how do we bring that to the instructional designers and instructors and professors at Air University. Um, you know, me being I think one of the ones at Air University that's focusing on immersive learning, I wanted to kind of give her my thoughts similar to what you kind of just mentioned about how can we scale immersive learning? How do we learn from other people's experiences that are doing things out there to bring into immersive learning? And the funny thing is, and this is something we can unpack. So we've talked about the power of immersive learning, and I think a few days ago we talked about the term experiential learning and
Yep.
how immersive learning is kind of
The
synonymous.
next the
the next,
next evolution of immersive learning, right? It is
yes,
the refinement of
yeah,
immersive learning, yeah, of experiential learning, right? So
exactly.
experience design, right,
Yep.
is ultimately going to incorporate immersion, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
And we brought that term up as well as learning experience design, which I think we're going to have another podcast on. But I mentioned those two terms, and she literally said the exact same thing that you're kind of mentioning. The one statement that she mentioned that we can kind of maybe unpack a little bit,
Hmm.
because I've been thinking about it when we talked this kind of alignment or next step in this terminology from experiential learning to this term of immersive learning. The provost thought the statement that she brought was is that the term maybe immersive learning is going to go outdated as well as we move
Okay.
forward. And I wasn't sure what she kind of meant by that because I think we are just in the moments of moving from the term experiential learning, which is still the foundational understanding of adult learning, but really immersive learning because I think where we're moving in across industry, across academia, of how education and training is moving into more personalized learning, and you start to bring in AI and things, and you're creating more of these immersive experiences, right? Previously, people would say, you know, how do I create experiential learning? But now we're using this term immersive learning. So I'm curious for us to maybe unpack, not sure what her statement meant by she thinks that term might be becoming outdated potentially, because I think it's kind of a newer term still. Not that I agree or disagree with her. I just thought it was an interesting statement that she mentioned. The next hour and a half with the provost was amazing. And so I just, that was the initial statement she made at the beginning. I'm like, and I've been sitting with it since the last day or two since I met with her the other day. Like, what would be the next? So the question for me is, what would be the next term then? And we can talk about that a little bit later. If immersive learning is becoming
So
outdated.
let's talk about that, Andy.
Yeah.
And here is, so let's say there in popular, let's say in popular um, pop culture that uh, we gain another term, right? Spectacular, visceral. I don't know, like I don't, whatever that term is. let's Let me set that aside for a second, and let's look at immersion, right?
Hmm.
The reason why we're going to need to pay attention to the term immersive learning is because there's so much to discover inside of
Oh yes.
that point of view on experience design, right? So let's talk about what immersion means, right?
Yes.
So immersion, as you simply think of the word, places you inside of something, right?
Yep.
Um, imagine what if you could stand under a waterfall of knowledge and simply be saturated by it, right? And so part of what happens with immersive experiences is it shrinks the distance between the audience member and the story, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about this because there are some massive shifts that are happening in our thought processes as human beings, and you can see it in the evolution of our story, right?
Yep.
So we have experienced story as voyeurs for the last 3,000 years, right? We've been watchers on the side of the mountain watching the play, right? Now the evolution is that watcher is now moving from the mountain onto the stage, right?
Yes.
Ultimately, with the capability of that watcher becoming the protagonist in the story.
Yes.
So that is a massive story evolution, and it requires one major story shift, which is choice, right? So now instead of having a dedicated plot line that is linear that everybody follows through, Now each of us have at least a sense of choice, if not real
Mhm.
choice, right?
Yes.
And real choice is the evolution of story. So how do you evolve that story?
Yes.
Um, and that so how do you write for that, right? I mean, even if we look at our childhood books of choose your own adventure,
Mm.
branching is simple, right?
Hmm.
The beauty is artificial intelligence is going to fill in that gap, right? Artificial intelligence is going to be able to anticipate, look, we want to keep these parameters, but based on choice, conversation can go this way,
Yes.
storyline can go this way.
Yeah.
So whether or not there's going to become a new term, the 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 word immersive has to be
Absolutely.
explored, defined, and I actually believe immersion is about to become our next major art form, right? So we're evolving out of a modernist point of view of story, right? So you imagine a movie, and we're watching a movie, and the director has decided what images to give us, what sounds to give us. We're looking at somebody's face, we're looking at a cigarette, right? We're looking at their eyes again, right? We're looking at somebody across the way. Ooh, what are they thinking about them? Right? The cigarette is half burned out. That tells us they've been sitting there for a while, right? And if there's a huge ash, they haven't actually been smoking, they've been paying attention to something else, right?
Yep.
So all of these images add up a story for us. Now, how do we do that in a
Mm.
world that is dynamic, that dynamically responds to the audience member, to the
Yeah.
user, to whatever this new name of that audience member is going to be,
Yep.
right? Because now they're the protagonists, so we have to alter the story based on their needs and give them enough choice to feel like they have um, autonomy in
Hmm.
this world, right? And so
Yep.
that generates this sense of presence, right? Um, and in that presence, you're living inside of a fantasy. For me, and we can talk about presence along the way, Andy, and
Absolutely.
um, um, but for me, presence is simply the moment the brain forgets it's inside of a fantasy.
Hmm.
And then
Yes.
we see powerful, powerful things happen. So that's my first thought on immersion. What do you think about that, Andy?
So, a few things hit me as you were talking about story and choice. The term agency comes to mind as well, because when you hear that term, and we'll have, I think, other conversations and other podcasts where we bring in the cognitive affective model for immersive learning, which talks about presence and agency, right, as the affordances that come from the immersive technology or the stimuli, if you will. And that presence and agency influences the affective and cognitive learning. And so when you mentioned choice, well, the camel model tells us, yep, when an individual has that sense of presence, it's coming from agency that they have, right, because of being absorbed or what you said, being put into the story. I think another term we can use is absorption into the story or absorption of the narrative, right?
Interesting.
Which I think is really a good way to look at it, right? So the participant is absorbing the narrative or the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned that the fact that AI will fill in some of these gaps, if you will, of the story that the participant chooses or has agency over. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in back when we were younger kids, choose your own adventure books. You had the author had to write all that out, those different choices, and then the
Those
reader had these
branches. Yeah.
branches, and the reader had those choices. And I think some in industry have probably talked about how AI can take away the humanity of individuals, take away choices of individuals. But actually, in this case, as you're talking, the AI is actually going to enhance the opportunity for people to have choice an agency in immersive learning or in immersive experiences, because you're going to need that because the more the AI can help fill in those gaps,
Yep.
the more opportunity, the more depth and breadth that the participant will have in agency of the storyline and however that is played out in whatever experience that is. And
Yep.
so this absorption I thought was interesting. You talked about the waterfall. If you could stand over a waterfall and kind of absorb all this um, information,
Knowledge, right? This
knowledge.
information.
So what if you took it the other way? Because I was looking at some of this yesterday. I was kind of thinking about us talking about immersion. It's like, what is that? If I looked at the history of the term immersion, and I found a thing on its Latin definition, which means to submerge someone into water. That's
Mm,
where it kind of came from. And so this plunking or dipping, putting someone into water, and then over time, um, academia and others started using immersion as a term, a theoretical term for the psyche, right? Immersing,
mm-hmm.
right, the individual into something through the story and other aspects we can unpack. But I thought that was neat how you talked about the waterfall, right? You're immersed under this water, and then so this interesting thing on water, right, as an analogy or a metaphor
Yep.
to immersion, and its Latin root words, it means to submerge into water. And so I just thought that was an interesting context to look at for a second. But that's where my initial thoughts as is you talked about choice. Um, I like the word absorption, absorbing into a narrative or a story. I thought was kind of interesting. So
Well, let's talk about the very the the most immediate benefit of immersive learning, and sort of the lowest hanging one of the lowest hanging fruits to gain access to is veteran experiences, right? It's that veteran experience that separates the novice,
mm,
right, um, from that effective professional, and the ability to replicate those life experiences, right, and to deliver them to an individual for their own learning and digesting moment, right? That's massive, right? That's
mhm.
so. I mean, imagine if every K to 12-year-old student shared one experience through each of their 12 years, right? Everybody in the country shared one experience, so 12 total experiences. What would that do to our culture, right? Does it bring us closer together? Is there a greater understanding? Does it create a foundational, um, something that we all can lean on? We all know, um, and so the great opportunity with immersive learning is to take whatever you're doing live and your live training now and to replicate it, right?
Yes.
Even before we begin to innovate, how do we replicate the great things that we're doing in life
Hmm.
inside of um, these experiences? And
Yep.
what we begin to understand is when we begin to add technology like a virtual reality,
Yep.
that we have the ability to limit the cognitive load inside of those learning experiences.
Yeah.
We can even focus, let's say in a learning moment, there are a number of different thought processes that we have to hold on to, right? We can drill those in slices before we get to the larger simulation, right? So
Mhm.
you can subdivide your learning moments because in the living moment, trying to pay attention to the moment, trying to allow all of the synthesis of the ideas that you've carried into that moment to allow you to interpret, to puzzle solve, to problem solve, to read human behavior, and to have empathy for these people. Holding all of that in your head at your same time can create a cognitive overload,
Oh yeah.
right? So as you've drilled these smaller pieces in slices along a learning pathway, right?
Hmm.
And that's something I'm looking forward to talking to you about, which is a learning pathway along across the technologies that assists an immersive learning experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But either way, these things then allow you to live the moment without that the interruption of mystery, right?
Right.
Because it's really the mystery of not knowing what's going to happen that creates adrenaline pumps sometimes, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Creates confusion, creates anxiety. Um, so how much of mystery can we remove so the brain can then focus on the living moment?
Right. And that helps them. And if you're what you're putting the participant through, right, for whatever that learning moment is, removing that cognitive load, right, and some of that mystery, right, is important. So I appreciate you talking and giving some voice on that part because we can discuss kind of what immersion is, but when and its application, right? Usually the application for us, what for me as an educator, as I put a participant into an immersive experience, what is that immersion doing? What is that stimuli doing as I'm putting them, immersing them into a story, right, inside of a story, and that story can be whatever it is. Um, how can I remove some of that mystery to relieve some of that cognitive load so they can get to the application of what I want them to get after for whatever, if it's an outcome or a learning objective or a behavior, whatever it may be. I think that's an interesting um, note to understand is when we look at immersion and we talk about putting a person through or into in a story, immersing them into a story, right? How do we remove some of that mystery? And that's where you bring in that immersive technology to potentially help with that. So I
Hmm.
think that's interesting in removing that mystery to help with the cognitive load to actually get to the effect that you want, especially in education, that
Hmm.
objective, the program outcome, the learning moment, if you will,
I
as
mean,
well.
let's face it, Andy. Most of immersive learning is practicing life,
Hmm.
right? Outside of life, and then there are a variety of ways right now to practice different parts of life. For example, some of the practice that you do with like a company like Moth and Flame
Hmm.
is allow the individual to practice the conversation,
Right.
right? The difficult conversation with an avatar,
Yep.
right? So, talk to me about that, and why you do that.
Yeah. So one of the probably key outcomes at Area University for most of our colleges and schools have some form of a leadership element to them. And so in those different colleges and schools, we're asking whether it's a young airman in the Air Force or a senior officer or senior enlisted, right, to practice the application of leadership, right, the act of humanity, to practice um, how you respond and act upon people. So that could be through emotional intelligence, your communication style, your active listening. And so to allow students to be put into different difficult conversations in a kind of safe, repeatable environment, we use this VR, I'll call it a VR conversation simulation, where students are put into a headset and they're having a conversation with another subordinate or a leader, another airman, a coworker from their unit in this headset, and they're given a problem. An airman comes to you, you're the leader, and they are showing up late to work, and you've called them into the office and to discuss it. But they think they're coming in because you're going to fire them or they're going to get in a lot of trouble, and you're just trying to figure out what's going on in their personal lives. So you're going to have this back and forth conversation in a VR simulation headset to practice those difficult conversations. Because we don't get to do that in real life. How often do you get to practice in the human domain, active listening and problem solving without it being the real thing? And then maybe you mess up in the real thing and like, I wish I could repeat that. I wish I could do that over. That
Yep.
conversation I had with the airman, it went horrible. It's over. I'm in my office. I'm reflecting on that moment I had with an airman, and I just went off. I went off tangent. I got too heated. I approached it too aggressively with them, and I think that I scared my airmen. I think they're upset. We really didn't resolve anything, and they left. And you're sitting there thinking about that conversation. What if you could repeat that conversation and practice it again, right? And it goes back to your what you mentioned, life experiences. Can I practice my life experiences? Can I repeat the things I've done from my past in a kind of safe, repeatable environment and have this kind of immersive storyline of this kind of scenario that was maybe something I experienced in my life in the past and get to practice that as I talk to this avatar and I have choices come up in my headset and I can pick these choices, a better, a good, a worse choice that come up, and see what happens as that avatar responds back to me and practice those different approaches is kind of where we're sitting with this immersive learning, or this would be an immersive story experience from something I did in the past I did do well, and now I get to practice it again in this safe, repeatable, kind of immersive learning environment.
Even more, you get to purposefully make bad choices, right?
Yes.
So we're live simulation training is so expensive, right? That very often it's not repeatable. Like if you're doing a large scale simulation and somebody misses that day, you're like, man, I'm sorry, right?
Yep.
Um, and we're not capturing those things, and we're going to talk. I hope that about ways to capture those so that those large simulations live forever. But because of that, we end up with a happy path of learning, right? We're going to do this right. We're going to do this right. We're going to do this right. This right. You do those four things right, and you get to the A, right? But what we want is professionals who can take their knowledge and through synthesis respond to the world, right? We don't know what's coming their way.
Hmm.
So that even in the act of making a wrong choice, they can adjust, right?
Right.
Um, so giving people the experience of bad choices outside of the fact, how many times do our editors tell us this is the right way to do it, this is the wrong way to do it? But
Right.
if you did it the wrong way, there's an element of rightness in it. There's a clue of something else that you could do, right? So so being able to explore all possibilities and the ability to do that asynchronously,
Yeah.
right? The ability for an individual to go through all of these experiences without the need for an instructor or other classmates,
Yep.
right? This way, somebody who needs to remediate themselves, somebody who wants to specialize in something, somebody who just needs to remind themselves of what they did 2 years ago because they're about to use it again, right? Or let's say it's a surgeon who just wants to practice their surgery,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Um, and or to review a surgery. Can I go through my actions in a surgery because I've been able to record them during the actual surgery experience, and then we can maybe put jurors through, the actual moment and see what happened and hear the conversation and
Yeah.
understand the context. So, what I also love about it is the there not only is there going to be training, but as we develop training, we're going to see the application into
Yeah.
the professional world.
Yes. And so we've been hitting on this kind of application and simulation, and we mentioned, right, we talked about here at our university using Moth and Flame, that and we use a VR conversation simulation that immerses, right, a participant into a storyline, and that storyline is them having a conversation with an airman from their unit, and that airman is the avatar in the VR headset, right? And that's a very specific simulation that's allowing our participants, our students, to practice leadership and human domain behaviors. But you mentioned earlier, as you see moving forward across industry, right, moving into an immersive or kind of an experience-based economy, I think we can see this application in other areas as well. If you in the gaming world, gaming is a huge industry, right? And storyline, right? How gamers are immersed into story through
Yep,
their games, right? And I think that they call this imaginative or fictional immersion, right? Where the gamer, right, is exercising their imagination based on the story of the game or the narrative of the game, right?
yep,
So gameplay and game design, right, has to also understand the importance of immersion because gameplay or game design it is a storyline, I think, right? And the gamer connects to that story. And
Yep.
and the term that they use for that type of immersion, I think is called imaginative or fictional immersion, where the gamer, the participant playing the game, is connected to, immersed to, or into that storyline of the game. And so and it's funny. And nowadays, when you look at gaming, like you mentioned, AI is coming back into that application where even non-player characters in games you can interact with now because AI is controlling the non-player characters in games to enhance, to make the depth
Yep.
and breadth of the story of the game more deep and more broad without having to do game development, game design to bring in those characters when you can attach AI to non-player characters in games, and gamers are having more immersive experiences because of the story of the game. And so I just think it's interesting as we go from one industry, whether it's us in academia and education and training, and you mentioned in studios and filmmaking, right? The choices and agency that individuals will have when they're watching a film or going to a movie, and then we can even see in the gaming industry, and we could probably peel apart several other industries, but all this immersive um, application. I think you mentioned at one time an experience-based economy, right? And it goes back to experiential learning.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. So we can talk about the experience-based economy. One thing I want to point out is, as you bring up the gaming industry, is obviously that's the first industry that began to teach us where we're going,
yep.
right?
Hmm.
Because the gamers are first person inside of a story-driven experience.
Hmm.
Um, and although in the beginning, when you and I were kids and the first game comes out, or maybe I'm showing my age, Pong, right?
Yes. Yep.
Um, there's no real storyline there, right?
Right.
But today, whether we're looking at a phone, an app on your phone, or whether you're looking at, playing a video game, like Call of Duty, or well, what's the car one inside of the arena?
Oh, Grand Theft Auto.
Oh, GTA is
GTA. Yeah.
so. I'll tell you stuff that they're doing exciting with GTA. So, because my son is, um, uh, they have separate servers that are set up for role play in GTA.
Oh wow. Oh yes.
So each of the, now you get in. So we're talking about story in video
Yes.
games.
Yep.
First off, we're first person, right?
Yep.
And whether anybody likes it or not, in GTA you can pick up a prostitute, right?
Right.
Um, and and um, and you can kill people, and they're there. So you can sell drugs and manufacture drugs, and so, um, but all of that is in this first person. We've got a storyline. We've got these elements now. These gamers are creating servers where they're creating a character. They're creating gangs. Like,
Hmm.
it turns out that my son's gang, not very proud of this, is the biggest drug dealers on their GTA server. You
Sure.
know, but and they actually, there are gang wars, there's relationships, there's conversations, they're human inside of these
Yep.
worlds, personified humans,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because you get to be more than a human, you get to be greater than human, you get to be a shooter, a killer, a speeder, a driver, right? And ultimately a superhero. Um, but so the gaming industry is really, it tells us the evolution of story is becoming first person.
Yeah.
Protagonist, it's about me, it needs to be customized for me as much as possible.
Hmm.
Now you talked about the experience economy. And you and I served on a brain trust for Governor Northam a few years ago to build a virtual city, or a virtual marketplace for Virginia, and that's still in process. Even though we finished the plan for it, um, what we discovered out of all of that with the other individuals on the brain trust was that what was headed our way was an experience economy,
Hmm.
and we've been able for thousands of years. We've been selling goods, we've been selling services, right?
Yep.
Hey,
Hmm.
if you help me pick up this rock, I'll give you, a piece of it when I break it up back at home. right?
Yep.
Um, so, hey, I'll give you this rock for that fruit, right? So we've sold goods and we've sold services. But for the first time, we're going to be able to aggregate and sell experiences. And
Mhm.
I think one of the things that really points this out to me is that in the last handful of years, Disney has added to its name an experience company, right?
Good. Yes.
And so, and 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 so, what that tells me is that they're aware that they're going to be able to scale their business beyond brick and mortar, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think. Go ahead. Keep going, JJ.
No,
Yep.
no, no, no. I was no, I the just the if Disney's able to create theme park experiences outside of the theme park,
Yes.
um, what's interesting to know is that it's our 19 and our 20 and our 21-year-olds who are going to be building these things, right?
Yes. Yes.
They are ahead of us. They're they're brilliant. There's an evolution in their thought, and so there's going to be a new marketplace for these people, these young people. Well, I guess of all ages, ultimately, really, um, to build immersive experiences and to get them in anyone's home in a split second, anywhere on the planet,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
As replicatable and as many times as necessary. So we
Yep.
start hitting the ability to scale these creations, and that's going to have a massive impact on society, right? So we stop seeing um, uh, the Walmart
Hmm.
of the world, because if you can get to anywhere to anyone at any time, um, then you're going to want to get to your most specific desire,
Yep.
right? So because there's a larger marketplace, you can create greater niche, smaller niche specializations, right?
Yes.
So and we can get to that individual, and that individual can get
Yeah.
to us with their business or their experience.
Yeah. No, I super appreciate bringing up Disney or experience-based economy because as we look at immersion and you mentioned right this ability to immerse someone into story, right, or someone's absorbing the story or the narrative that we're putting them into. You mentioned obviously Disney World is obviously an expert um, organization that knows how to immerse people into story, whether it's through
Yeah.
their movies or going to Disney World, Disneyland. You're hitting on the nail on the head here with understanding really this term immersion. If we pull it back out of technology and not so much immersion in the technology, but immersion just in general, right? How do other industries right bring in immersion, whether it's gaming or here Walt Disney? I think as you mentioned Walt Disney, I think they are starting to do that. I remember seeing an article, several of the Disney characters, like the Marvels franchise and those things that Disney now owns, they built them into Fortnite, where there's entire
Mm-hmm.
immersive lands, environments, and spaces to be Spider-Man or to be the Hulk, or any of these other Marvel, Captain America, the Avengers, all these
Yep.
characters that Disney has acquired, not just acquired the rights to the movies that they have and to make the new movies, but like you just mentioned, to create other immersive experiences aren't in these physical locations of Disneyland or Disney World or physical environments of physical experiences, but other immersive experiences using technology like Fortnite that they've acquired, and it's a whole. If we get into kind of the metaverse, right, decentralizing, right, the ability for anybody to go into it, and gets into even some of the virtual monopolizing of money and things, and the bitcoins and things like that.
Yep.
All that gets into it, but because Disney understands immersion, right, the ability to bring people into story in several different ways, which kind of reminds me of another example, maybe somewhat similar to Disney, but a little bit different. We talked about it one time, and we need to do a trip out to Las Vegas, you
Uh
and I, and we need to go to
huh.
Area 15 out in Las Vegas, which is it's a 2 block radius or 2 blocks of a city. and it's all inside. It's this giant building. It's two block building, and inside of it's all these immersive experiences. And you probably have heard some of these things like those immersive Van Gogh type. You know, you're walking instead of just looking at the Van Gogh painting, you walk into an entire room, and the entire room is the Van Gogh painting. So you're inside the painting, and that's just one experience at Area 15 in Las Vegas. This ability to immerse people into these experiences or stories, but one that's really unique there is called Dramcore. And I think I mentioned this too at one point. Out at Area 15 in Vegas, there's a food market or a convenience store market where you can go buy convenience items, food, like kind of like a gas station, and it's called Omega Mart. Now, the thing about Omega Mart is it's not really a real convenience store. You can buy things in there, but things you would never need. It's like chili powder for your eyeball, right? Just really random weird stuff. You can buy that. The employees are actually employees, but they're also immersive actors because Omega Mart is owned by Dramcore. And if you go to like the Dramcore website, there's an entire storyline of this entire company history, who the president is, who his children are, who are the employees, the history of the company, the takeover of another company. All these things has an entire story. It has a whole link on news articles and news video feeds and stuff. It's an entire story of an entire company called Dramcore that you can go and look at. And then if you want to go experience what the company's product is, which is this convenience store called Omega Mart, and you can go and it's in Vegas, and they have two of them. One's in Vegas called and it's called Area 15 there, and it's a store called Omega Mart. And the funny thing is, part of that story of this company is that there are actually aliens that are running the things behind the scenes, right? And that they're creating this goo that's in all the products, like this radioactive kind of goo or liquid or something. And if you go to the Omega Mart store at Area 15, and you can shop around, there are hidden back rooms, there are hidden things, and everything in there. There are clues and stories and newspaper articles hanging on the walls and stuff that tell stories of potentially who are these aliens. So do you sympathize with the alien people, or do you sympathize with the CEO that's trying to make all this money at the expense of the
Hmm.
customers and stuff like that? And then there's the storyline of the aliens, and they work in the back behind in the back of the convenience store that you can't get to, but you can kind of get to if you find the right doors in the convenience store to open up and walk into and stuff,
Nice.
right? But so that you have this immersive experience like you would if you were going to like an escape room
Yep.
thing, but you can also buy things like you're at an actual convenience store. But it's also kind of like a not a breakout room, but it has that feeling, if you will.
Yep.
But
Yep.
all of that is underpinned by an entire website, an entire company that's been developed called Dramcore, with a CEO, like an entire employee list and history, the whole storyline, company news articles, video feeds, all kinds of stuff.
We're
So this,
going to see this more
yeah,
and more, Andy.
yep,
I mean, just imagine if, before you went to Vegas, if you could participate in an online game where you created a character that was a
hmm
casino royale kind of character. You could be a smuggler, you could be a spy, you could be,
hmm
from villain to good guy, right? And what
yes,
if you went to the casino? When you showed up as that person, and you had a full immersive experience and story
yes,
that was nothing about you as you went through this, you know,
yes,
um, so now you're still participating in the casino, but now you're participating as Kruger,
yeah, absolutely,
whoever.
yes,
Um, and can you extend that story? Could it last over
yeah,
years? Could you
right.
come back? Could there be people that you interact with online? Can you extend it? That's the other thing about the immersive ecosystem, right? Because we're really immersion. The immersive ecosystem extends us through technology
hmm
beyond life, right? But let's talk about immersion for a second and the fact that it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, right?
Absolutely.
Immersion is not about technology,
Yep.
right? Our elementary school teachers are brilliant at immersive learning for our
Yes.
kids, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, do you remember when you were a kid, there was a joke. Okay, you're going down a forest, and the person is, they're throwing their hands by the side of your head as if, trees are passing you by, right?
Right.
And then the joke is obviously, you hit a tree and they smack you in the head,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But that is an immersive,
Yeah.
moment. Um, and so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that immersion is not new, but
Yeah.
with technology, it
Yes.
is going to scale.
Yeah.
It's going to become easy and inexpensive to create and replicate.
Yeah.
Um, and you had spoken about Disney, and I think Disney are the experts
Mhm.
in this. And so, about 15 years ago, I was on a charrettes, like a brainstorming session with Disney people, and this is what they taught me. They said, if we take our audience member, right, the people that come to the park, and we get them to engage through entertainment with another audience member, right? We now have two unpaid performers,
Mm.
right? So, can we get our audience members to interact with each other inside of
Wow.
a defined experience or a defined story,
Wow.
right?
Yes.
And so that to me has that opened up so much, right? Because um, you can have bots inside of these
Yep.
immersive digital worlds, but when you can have human beings interacting in each other's story, it
Yep.
just becomes deeper, more complex. First off, they're impacting each other on a human
Yep.
level that it really isn't, happening today.
Yeah. That's I've never thought that, but what a unique perspective of right moving the story from maybe the storyteller almost to two participants telling the story with each other, right? And the
Yes.
Disney sits it was really interesting. So you're creating the kind of the environment, and then the two participants kind of get to build that story and how they interact with each other in that kind of environment. Which is funny. Environment, I think, is one of the factors of immersion, right? Environment that and you've mentioned it, story, right, or the narrative. I think another factor is right the environment, right? And so that physical environment or the contextual environment that you set up, whether that's in technology or what we've been kind of talking, whether it's Disney or you go to some thing like Area 15 and go into a Mega Mart Stramcore
Yep.
convenience store, right? It doesn't. So immersion doesn't have to be um, technology driven, like you mentioned. If we understand some of those elements, story or the narrative, the environment that we set up for the individual, it's even walking into a hotel room or into a hotel. I think you become immersed as you walk into the lobby of a hotel, right? The sounds that you see or hear, right? What you see in the hotel lobby, even maybe how the hotel lobby smells, right? They're trying to set that environment for you, and then you start to tell kind of the story of this is a really fancy kind of place, or this reminds me of because of what I see or what I hear or what I smell, or other senses, other stimuli, right? Stimuli, the things that we bring into the story, right, to immerse that person, so they start to create that story for themselves, which kind of goes back
Well,
to fictional storytelling.
and we saw this in the 90s, right, with
Mhm.
the birth of what some people would call there's a book out called The Experience Economy, um, that talks about this, and it's the idea that when you go to the Outback Steakhouse, right? It gives you a flavor of Australia, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Outback, yeah, on the barbie,
yeah,
shrimp on the, so you in that experience, from the 90s, we saw all the birth of Olive Garden and all of these
yep,
different, that hotels were getting themed. And
mhm,
what's really funny is when I was telling you I met with Disney during the charrettes, the whole point was they were looking at the experience economy, and one of the things that they had found was they're like, look, we can theme buildings, we can theme costumes,
Mhm.
but we're having challenges theming human beings,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So, how do we do that? And you and I are actually dealing with that now and needing to theme human beings for training, right?
Yep.
We need
Yep.
a commander, right? We need an
Yes.
airman. We need, this
Yep.
specific specialization. We need, this moment to happen.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Uh, so it's interesting that you bring up, because I think we're in the 90s with the experience economy and theming all of that. Now with AI and with immersive technology, we can begin theming the soft things.
Yeah.
We can theme, the context. We
Yes.
can
I love. Oh
theme
my gosh.
the
Yes.
conversation, right?
Yes.
Um, Go
I
ahead.
think that's an evolution of kind of this experience based approach that you're talking about as you bring in AI, right? Is theming the contextual environment, the contextual conditions, which we haven't. I don't think we maybe have gotten there yet. But we're starting to with your examples of what Disney's doing, and maybe others are starting to do is, and when we see when we bring a participant into an immersive technology space like VR, augmented reality, the AI is probably going to be able to help to theme, right, some of the contextual conditions of the environment or the theme, like you mentioned, like for us, leadership settings and stuff, difficult scenarios for an airman or a guardian in the Air Force or Space Force to be involved in. How do I immerse someone into a difficult conversation or into a difficult situation? Or how about an ethical situation that actually feels authentic and relevant to the individual versus probably what we've seen in the past in academia, which would have been traditional role playing. Let me give you an ethical situation and you tell me how you would solve it, or you role play between two students in a classroom an ethical situation. Well, that becomes difficult. It doesn't become as maybe authentic,
Right.
because this is, and I think we'll talk about suspension of disbelief in some other times of our podcast, but that there's no suspension of disbelief for those two students in this role playing situation potentially in a classroom.
Yep.
The instructor says, um, you know, you're hungry and poor, and your spouse needs medicine, and you have no money, but this doctor has an antidote and a cure, but the doctor is going to charge $100,000 for it because he's the only one that has the solution for your spouse's illness.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Right.
so you could either argue and figure out, like, work with them to reduce the price, or you could go steal it from them. What are you going to do? Right? That becomes very fictitious, if that's the
Well,
right
oh, well, and what's funny is you brought up earlier absorption,
word.
right?
Yes.
There's no absorption of the story, right?
Yes. Yep.
You've got to give people time, to get into the story before you ask them the question, right? It
Yes.
becomes more like your ABCD exam, right? If
Right.
you're a this, whatever, okay, I'm going to bubble this in, versus, um, um, instead of starting the story at the point of conflict, right? Or at the point of choice, where choice has to be made. What what happens if we start the story when your alarm goes off in the morning,
Mm.
right? I'm waking up, I'm
Hmm.
brushing my teeth, and so who are you? I'm Ben, I'm JJ, I'm Sally, I'm whatever. I'm looking myself in the mirror, I'm watching myself brush my teeth, uh, you know. Um, my wife says, "Honey, I'm leaving. I'm taking the kids to the whatever." Okay, I'm a father, I'm a wife,
Yep.
I'm
Yes.
a this. Hey, make sure you pick up the kids for at 3 o'clock. Okay, I'm responsible, right? Hey, have a good day at work. I hope it's as good as last week. Hey, I'm already successful. So
Right.
all of these things start to happen, and then I'm already successful. Hey, happy birthday. Oh, it's my birthday. How great is that? Ring, 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 ring. Hello? Hey, Sally, um, we need you in here right away. There's a challenge here at work. right?
Yep.
It
Yes.
gives me the drop, right?
Yes.
I
Yep.
experience the drop. And if I have to answer in the moment or under a time crunch,
Yes. Yes.
it will create adrenaline inoculation and it will let me see my instinctual decisions,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
My instinctual decisions are not bad. They need to be refined. I need to be able to look at them,
Yep.
right? So can I manufacture instances? It's exactly what happens with like baseball players and football players. They
Hmm.
practice,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So that their instinctual responses
Yes.
can happen even when 50,000 people or 10 million people are watching them,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
and to
I.
your point, when you put a group of people in front of a classroom and say, hey, I need somebody who's going to play a chauvinist. First off, nobody wants to be the bad guy, you
Right.
know?
Right.
But the intimidation, the pressure, um, also the awareness of being watched and being seen, you're
Yeah.
not taking in this story at that level.
No, no. And but I think your example is great as like you mentioned, the alarm clock goes off, and right, and that's kind of where, if you will, the story starts. I think part of immersion, one of the other factors, whether it's the story or the narrative or the environment, right, is these individual factors that you've kind of talked about, right? Creating the affective state for this person, as you're kind of setting them up, as the the interaction of what we want them to do to practice a certain behavior, maybe or skill. Before I get there, I need to set up this kind of, who this person kind of is, or help them add to that to put them into that space, whether it's the mood, the preference, what their skills is, like you mentioned in your example. Yeah, you're a well, highly educated, successful worker,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're married and you have two kids because you added that in the story at the beginning. Let's say if this person's gone to an immersive, maybe VR or AR experience, and this kind of story of, so who they are, these individual factors, the knowledge that they have, the goals that they want, the motivations that they need. These are all factors that come into part of that story. And then, like you mentioned, this drop comes now that, and all of a sudden now you are, hey, you got a phone call from, your supervisor, and they're upset, and also, the supervisor's there. Now you're talking to the supervisor to practice this human domain conversation. But the story of kind of individual factors of who you are is kind of is set. So this, and I'm probably saying it wrong, almost like a pre-story. So bringing a person
Yes,
into
yes,
the
yes.
story, in the middle of the story, and then exiting the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's really first something I'd like you to define for us is affective state. But before we do that, I just the backstory is really important,
Yes.
right? Those existing elements, you and if you read them in exposition, they're not going to land, right? You're this, you're this, you're this, you're
Yeah.
this. You have to experience these things
Yes.
um, in the story before they begin to matter to you. So
Hmm.
will you talk about what does that mean, affective state?
Yeah. So the affective state is, the it's the psychological, point that, an individual connects, to the kind of the immersive experience. It's, some will call it kind of a flow state, if you will. But the affective state is looking at the emotional kind of connection, that the individual, is bringing into that immersive experience. And so, two of the easier examples,
Okay.
if you look at flow, might be you either have anxiety, as you're in it, or you're bored, or you have what we call arousal within the experience, this connection or arousal. Um, a lot of times you'll hear affective state as in, time flies by when I'm in this experience, because there's a connection, or a flow that you have, much like if you're like doing something, a chore, something that you like to do, and all of a sudden you start playing music while you're doing the chore, and then an hour goes by, and you're like, oh, I had no idea an hour went by, because that music puts you in this affective state of the thing that you're doing, right? So
Ah,
it's temporal time, the time starts to change, it can slow down or speed.
yep, yep.
So that, don't know if that gives the best description, but it gives some elements around
So
exactly.
the affective state is the state that you're in when you're within the experience.
Correct.
Um, and it's that place that has you, well, experiencing
Yes.
and so do you the affective state so each of us carry things into our own affective state then,
Yes.
right? So we may carry anxiety, we may carry biases and judgments,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
um, and But the affective state also means that I'm there and capable of receiving stimuli
Yes.
so that I can be affected by
Yep.
that world. That makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
And it's that. So let me tell you how important that is, right? Um, let's talk. I've seen people who won't put on a headset
Yep.
because they're afraid to get into VR for
Hmm.
some reason,
Right. Hmm.
right? Um, I have seen people that are convinced that they are going to be ill when they're in the headset, that 30 seconds in the headset, they're already ill,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
And so, they're bringing that into their affective state. Actually, they're
Hmm.
disrupting their
We're
affective
just
state.
absolutely. Yes. Yes. There's this preferences that we bring in to it. So when we look at immersion, especially when those that want to assess the level of immersion that someone has, when you try to objectively assess it, whether it's normally what we see is like pupil dilation and heart rate and skin your electro skin conduction induction that you have, that you can monitor with patches on your skin, those types of things. But those are, again, those are all a lot of autonomic reflexes that are right that you totally really can't control. But these other preferences that people bring in, their biases and stuff, will influence their level of immersion, like you mentioned. If they
Yep.
come in thinking that they're going to be ill and sick, right? That's going to influence their the immersion that they have, or the effect of it, the presence that they have, right? So it is hard to control those aspects. And then when you talk about assessments, that will always play into it, and not knowing it's hard to replicate that, right? Because for each individual, it could be a tad different. If you're using the same immersion, the same story, and I'm immersing these two different people into the same story, the same immersive experience, that immersion may not work for one versus as it will for the other. And that's something as educators and as developers we need to understand, is that the um, contextual elements of an individual, the things you can't control from an individual, right? The viewpoint they bring, the biases that they bring, the fears, the anxiety, boredom, even somewhat their
Yep.
skills that they bring into the immersive experience, are things that we're going to have to understand and mitigate as best we can. Much like you mentioned, how to relieve some of the mystery of things,
Yep.
right, is going to be important to that
Well,
immersion.
it's also about building a culture, right?
Hmm.
A
Yes.
culture of support, a culture of safety, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, imagine that you're an instructor somewhere and another instructor is telling your classmate, your students, before they come to see you, a trusted instructor tells them, this class is not so good. You might not want to listen. You might not, right? So that affects that student before they come into your class, right? It can affect your relationship with them and how they treat you.
Hmm.
The same thing is with this technology, right?
Yes.
So a culture. What we're talking about is developing a culture where these immersive experiences are embraced. What that also means is you develop a culture of um, the ability to fail inside of these experiences,
Hmm.
right? If you're going to, because if people are going to go inside of these experiences and they're going to be ultimately recorded,
Hmm. Yeah.
you have to give them a sense of safety
Yeah.
that they're not going to be judged and punished for what is watched in there,
Right.
right?
Oh, yes.
And so um, and so part of that is, and one of the major low hanging fruit opportunities for immersive learning is self evaluation,
Hmm.
right? We get in, we do an experience, the teacher judges us, we get an A, B, C, D, F, right? Well, what if I could actually go in and do that experience as many times as I want and choose the one that I show my teacher, right? So I can do it until I get it right, right?
Right.
Or
Yep.
what if I get into an experience like, let's say it's my first medical examination as as a PA, right? As a student to become a physician's assistant, and I'm getting evaluated for this. Well, what if I could get in there and I could capture my entire experience. And then afterwards, what if I could point out to the teacher everywhere I did right, everywhere I did wrong,
Hmm.
right? Now, am I not learning metacognitive, right? The ability to think about how I think,
Yep.
metacognition, right? Which is the highest level of learning for me,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
So, um, self evaluation is one of the massive tools that's going to come out of this. Um, and it's going to, and then it changes learning or grading from a punishment system to really evaluating effort, right?
Right.
It's like, look,
Yep.
you could have evaluated yourself. You didn't point out half the things you did wrong, right? Now we know you are truly missing these things, and you
Yep.
can't correct them on your own. Um,
Yep.
so, yeah,
Yeah. No, yes, and I think like you mentioned this um, changing culture, right? As cultures change over time, it's always a slow process. But if we think about the generations that are coming up, what's I, f- I forget the individual's name, but he just coined the new generation of adults, beta. I think they're called betas.
uh,
Um, so they are born. I think I forget. I have to look it up. But beta is the new generational term, which means those that are just born starting in 2025, and for the next I think 20 or 30 years, however long the generations, how long that spectrum of time captures for that context of those people. Right, they're gonna be born into a generation of an experience-based economy.
yep,
AI is part of their life, right? So their affinity and their ability to accept immersive learning in different ways and the expectations of being immersed into education and learning is quite different than when I came through. Is quite different than when you came through with the different generations. So I think we will see probably this cultural probably shift. But that what's interesting is this new beta generation that are starting their birth in 2025 for the next 20 years, the developers of the immersive experiences and the immersive learning that they will go through in K-12 education and adult education is starting kind of with us and those that are coming that are probably in high school and college that are going to be coming um, into the workforce that will be developing these things for this new beta generation. So we have the spectrum of those that didn't grow up in immersive learning and those that are just on the fringes of it in adult learning about this, if you will,
mm-hmm,
maybe a new workforce of immersive learning experts, the learning experience design type experts that are just maybe starting to populate into adult education into the workforce, but hopefully is growing because you have this new beta generation that is going to expect and has this culture of being immersed through immersion through storytelling in different forms and fashions with AI enhancing those and things. So I think I appreciate that conversation part because I think the culture part is important if we don't understand the culture of the different generational workforce that we have and those
yep,
coming behind us. And do we have people that understand what the next generation is going to expect, especially in education and training and simulations and right development? We are the ones that are sitting on it with those right below us and the other generation that are going to be the workforce that's going to develop the stuff. And if they don't have that understanding, right, then we could miss the mark on experience-based economy, immersive learning at large, scaling in K-12, adult education.
Yep.
The
Well,
culture.
it's a national security issue, right?
Absolutely.
It's a national security issue. We know that Asia and South Pacific are adopting immersive technologies faster than the United States right now.
Yes.
And if that happened at a great level and continued happening, there would be a point where we would have a generation behind theirs
Yeah.
in innovating with these technologies. Um, the massive opportunity that's being afforded to us by our scientists, right, are sandboxes, right? Are these sandboxes that allow non computer science people, computer sophisticated people, right, to apply their subject matter expertise, to
Mhm.
build inside of these immersive worlds without needing to code, right? So if you look at something like Orchestrate VR,
Mhm.
right? Um, the ability to build and capture live moments and to layer knowledge over top of it,
Yeah.
right? And layering is one of the major elements of immersive learning or these immersive worlds, whether it's augmented reality and you're wearing an Apple Vision Pro, and layered in front of you is what you were talking about, the Marvel characters, right? Like
Right.
I think it's the Watcher in the new Marvel experience on the headset, which is just amazing. You know, the Watcher is standing in your room and they're
Yep.
talking to you and they're gonna introduce you to some characters, and you're gonna go into some worlds and some of
Yep.
them are gonna come into your world.
Yep.
um, and so, but the fact that these experiences, like through Orchestrate VR, can be built in a day on your own, and
Yep.
now they live in perpetuity and can be sold and shared and
Yep.
data collected on, right? Because live live training is very hard to data collect on,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Somebody needs to write an after report on what they saw.
Yeah.
Where if we just stick in a 360 camera inside of the living moment, it's captured forever,
Yep.
right? Now, somebody can review it, and multiple people can review it, leave all of their thoughts. Later, AI will review it, right?
Right.
AI will tell
Yep.
us what it saw, and so as because artificial intelligence and these immersive technologies are going to fit very very closely together.
Yes.
Um, I mean, we're going to be able to tell a story, and as we're telling the story, it's going to grow and happen around us,
Yep.
right? Now, it might be metaphorical, it might be impressional, it might be, it's going to come from AI generated images, but
Yep.
those are going to get better. They're going to become more accurate. They're going to become more personalized to what you like,
Yes.
right? The
Yep.
AI is going to anticipate. Oh, she likes this style,
Yep.
right? She likes this format. Um,
Very
and
true.
so, we also see that we're going to be building our own AIs that probably walk around with us and have our own
Hmm.
customized AIs that pay attention to the things that matter to us. And I actually think as people, well, we see this already as people are now building their custom AIs, they're then selling them to others, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And it could just be, I mean, it could just be a these are the questions I ask the AI, and it gives me this kind of data. Um, Man, I'm willing to buy that off you because I don't know what to ask it to get exactly that
Yep.
material.
Yeah. Yep. Um, and all this is funny. All this revolves back around, right? Story, where we kind of where we started from. We talk about immersion, right? That term, immersion equals story. If we had to, shrink it down. I mean,
Yep.
all we kind of we hit on all areas in different ways, but man, we bring this back to story, and the more we I think understand how we create that story, whether it's with the immersive technology or some type of physical environment or in some different industry, right? It's creating the story and then the participant being able to be plunged into, right? If you go back
Yep.
to that definition, to to dip them into the story or to them absorb that story. right, is really what we think about immersion, and then you look at each industry a little bit differently, and then you can start to pick up on those elements. Immersive technology, right? The types of stimuli that help us enhance that story in a virtual or a kind of augmented reality environment. We can enhance that story with different types of stimuli, whether it's the sound or the audio or the visual, the smell, the context that's happening in the virtual augmented environment, right? Then that's how you would communicate to developers that way. But if you're Walt Disney, it's going to sound a little bit different. If you're a Las Vegas casino, right? How do you keep somebody inside a casino?
Yep.
It's bringing them into the casino, right? That pre-story, if you will, and that's why people. It goes back to the affective state of mind. That's why and you hear it all the time when people go to a casino and they're in there, they lose track of time, right? Because
Yep.
they have this affective state of mind of this story, this immersive experience that they're having in the casino, and then they spend more money because of this of I think it's partly the story that the casino is trying to provide to the participant, but I think it's also the story that starts to play out in the participant's mind about who they are and where they are, and
Yep.
hey, it's how often do I get to spend money, and like it's like and then they start to have so narrative psychology, right? Creating meaning and value from our stories. So we start to create these stories in our heads about, well, it's okay if I'm going to spend an extra $200 on this one hand, right? Because they start to push
Right.
through these for Vegas for justifying the spending of their money, but it's through this kind of story vision that they have in their head of narrative psychology, and then they lose track of time, which hits this affective state of mind, this flow that they're in. It's the sounds, it's the environment, it's the things that they see, it's the interaction with the employees, just like at Disney World, same things. And then they walk outside like, oh my gosh, it's dark outside. I walked in here at 8 a.m. Right? So, so this storyline of coming into something, and casinos is a great example, or in VR, coming into it, the story that you're given in the experience and the story that brings you out of the experience. Right? All these things I think are hugely important that we just don't think about when we think about immersion. Like, yeah, I can immerse somebody, but it looks different across industries. But they're all those elements across the different industries are relevant to, I think, where we sit a lot in the immersive technology side of things when it comes to education and training and simulations and things.
Well, one of you know, life is not a Jeopardy exam,
Right.
right? And most of us, I don't know about you, but I felt growing up that most of my education was training me for a Jeopardy exam, right?
Hmm.
It was knowledge, word test, word definition, um, uh, it was, they were very clean answers. I needed to be able to vomit back, the rote
Absolutely.
explanation or whatever that my teachers had given. Now we understand that knowledge is is not useful unless it can be synthesized, right?
Hmm.
Because now look, we've got the internet, we can gain that knowledge in a split second, or our phones,
Yes.
right?
Right. Hmm.
So all of that knowledge has to be put into action through story,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
And that story begins with who am I,
Hmm. Oh,
right?
yep.
Then it moves to where am I, right?
Yep.
Then it moves to what am I doing, right? Then
Yes.
it moves to why am I doing this? And what's exciting is that the how am I doing this comes out of the living moment,
Hmm.
right? So I learn my own how. I discover my own how. I can refine my own how
Hmm.
because I can create a simulated moment of a gambler at a table, right? That moment where they get caught up,
Hmm.
right? And they get lost,
Yep.
right? And now they're in a spiral and they can't break it out because they're sure that that next hand is going to save them,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Can we create a perspective? We can, right? We can create perspective in the same way that we can show some, like a college student who has been sexually inappropriate, right?
Hmm.
And we need to show them, to put them in immersive experiences of microaggressions for them to see how their small behaviors in ways are oppressing somebody, or injuring them or hurting them, or making them feel awkward, or making
Yeah.
them feel like another, or sexualizing them in the way that you're not necessarily aware that you're doing, because in your culture, in your home, in your hometown, however you acted was appropriate,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Hmm. Well, let me. So JJ, it hits me in a, if we. So you mentioned, we use moth and flame. Let me give you an example that I think really hits literally on what you're just talking about of this storyline, especially with this last example of maybe a college student that's inappropriate. But let's say in the Navy is going through where they want all their sailors to get their intervention training, intervention bystander training, and
yep.
so they've actually have worked with Moth and Flame, and I got to experience this. I'm going to call it a story, I'll call it a double story, in a VR in the VR headset. So I go into a VR headset, and I'm on a Navy ship, and I'm standing next to my supervisor and two other sailors, and we're on the ship, and we're kind of having our morning meeting, and I'm a female, and my supervisor is a male, and another male person is there, and then this other female is in front of me, and they're having this meeting, and you're observing the commander, this young commander, making inappropriate comments at the staff meeting to the other female that's standing across from you, and then it kind of fades, and then now you're kind of at the chow hall, and you have like five or six of these moments of interactions with different people, this small group of people that you work with and your boss throughout the day, that just keep escalating into these inappropriate kind of comments about this one other sailor, female sailor, to the point where now the boat is docked at the shore and you have leave time, and that whole group is going to go out to a bar together, and now you're at the bar, and the same group, these same people are making these inappropriate jokes throughout the evening about this one female sailor that you're with, and again, you're the female person in this experience, and you start to hear other conversations of these groups. And it's all in the VR thing, a story where you can hear them planning and plotting to ensure as they leave that certain people are going to leave early. So the only person that's left is the one guy that's been making all these inappropriate comments throughout the day, and to that female Navy sailor, and you're there, and now he's talking to you, and you get to start to make choices, and you're making choices throughout this whole conversation and stuff. But nothing is an intervention choice, if you will. It's just kind of passive choices you get to pick. And the last set of it is he's basically asking you to leave the bar so that he's there by himself with her, and that he will take her home. And so all your choices, the choice that you're given the headset, basically are all um, the wrong choices, where you are going to leave at some point in this conversation choicing. And so after that happens, the next day you see that this female sailor, and she's talking to you, and she's crying, and she is quite upset, and she basically tells you that he took her home, and he raped her
Uh huh.
and stuff, right? And so that's the simulation, and all throughout that you're making these choices and speaking to these individuals in this scenario, and at the end, she is raped, and she talks about how she wants to die and not be in the Navy and all these things, and then the simulation starts all over again, from the exact same experience, but
Nice.
your choices, you have other choices that are there, that weren't there previously, right? And they're more
Aggressive.
aggressive, and to intervene at different points throughout that same storyline. And if you do pick some of those choices, when it gets to the end of it, and you're talking to the same female sailor the next morning, she didn't get raped, and
Yep.
the conversation is completely different. So it lets you experience this almost like going back in time. And I thought it was a really unique way of Moth and Flame, you experiencing a story and then going back, almost like back in time, and experiencing the story again, but you have extra choices that, and if you choose them, the storyline changes. And I feel like I've seen movies like this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, how lovely is that? You know,
Yeah,
you've seen the negative repercussions of your inaction,
correct.
and now you get to relive that moment again and change that outcome, right?
Yep,
So,
yep.
you know, the idea of showing, you know, the results of your action or inaction is one of the massive opportunities of immersive experiences, right?
Yes, yeah.
Um,
I thought it was a good example because you get to experience, and we talk about this, right? How often can you go back and experience your life experiences, and could I do it differently? And this is one where it gives you that, maybe the negative example, or the, a negative experience, and then it lets you get to repeat that experience and let you make choices. So
and it causes you to feel responsible,
yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah,
right?
yeah. Well,
Because your
mhm.
warning, your bells were ringing the whole time, right? You're
Right, and you just, and the choices that were given in the headset were just, I would, normally we would see in these types of immersive simulations where you were having a virtual reality conversation simulation, you're going to have three or four choices, and they're usually going to be kind of good, better, best. But in this instance, the way they developed this kind of storyline, I would call this immersive experience, was in the first experience moment, right? It was all non-good, non-good. Not, they were, nothing was going to be an acceptable thing that you would probably normally respond to or say, if you were to, if you had your own kind of free will choices. Some would probably intervene, but so you just know that these choices are just not seen to be impactful, and like I would probably do something different. But you have to walk through that story and experience it for you to go back in time again, if you will, and now have these other choices added into the experience. I thought it was a unique way of immersive storytelling.
yep.
Um, it,
I mean, I love it. What it you know what it makes me think of is, let's say that um, the organization had multiple experiences where one of their personnel was molested or raped. And what they found was, when they talked to people, people saw moments where
yes,
the cues were there, but their answer was,
yes,
I didn't know how to interject my thought. I didn't know what to say. So what's neat is that um, they take the learner through the experience where their responses are ineffective. They don't give them a response, right?
hmm,
Their brain is not giving them something that they can choose that will interfere with the moment. So because of that, we watch the terrible thing happen. Now, afterwards, after that sense of responsibility sits in our chest and
mm,
sits in our belly, right? We can feel it, it's visceral.
yes,
Now we go back and now we give active choices. And what happens when we see those choices is we go, of course I could have done that. Of course I could have done that. Right? Even as we're learning and discovering, half of these things are common sense,
hmm,
right? But when you're in the moment, common sense often doesn't play out,
right. Oh yeah, yep,
right? Um, so I really I love the evolution of that learning process, and this is an experience that can be replicated um, in so many different kinds of learning opportunities,
yeah,
right?
yes,
Whether it's a mechanic um, on on a jet, right?
hmm,
Who doesn't check all their stuff properly, and in that check, we see the person die that they just talked to,
yep,
right? So establishing a sense of responsibility
yeah,
um, is is definitely one of the elements that comes out of living through
yes.
these moments.
Do you remember, when you came out here, to Air University a few years ago, and we shot some 360 videos to kind of capture some moments and experiences that, may be found, as an event in the Air Force, and
Yep.
one of those we did that squadron commander meeting where the flight commander at the end of the meeting told the squadron commander, "Hey, I just had a one of my spouses, one of my airmen's deployed downrange, and his spouse came by and was really upset and wanted to talk to me as her, as her husband's flight commander. She wanted her husband to come home from his deployment because she's struggling, at home, being the single parent, raising the kids and stuff. And so I went by the house. It was, disheveled, and it just wasn't clean, and she looked really bad. And so I told her, let me go talk to the boss. So boss, I'm here. We got the command team, and we shot that in 360 because
Yep.
that's a real moment or experience. I mentioned that because if I pull it apart, I was telling the provost about us recording that experience, and then the fact that we needed to add orchestrate onto it to add layers onto it for more immersive learning. But we've captured this moment, this experience of a command team doing something that they do on a daily basis. Have a squadron commanders meeting, and the commander asks his supervisors, officers, and enlisted what things are going on in your units. How's the mission going, and how are the people going? And here's a response from one of his flight commanders. And how does that squadron team, that command team, kind of deal with it? And what I
Right.
told her is, if we were able to kind of tell that story, but if I unpacked it just a little bit more, I also mentioned to her the reason we shot that story and that experience is because we use another simulation that uses a live avatar or an actor that controls an avatar on screen, and that's the scenario that the students go through. So the student experiences this live simulation of talking to the spouse as an avatar that's being controlled by an actor to kind of tell this story, right? Which is what actors do, and have the skill set of improv and storytelling to tell the story as a deployed spouse to this flight commander, as an avatar simulation in a live conversation. I need my spouse to come home early, and they have that experience. And then we layer another experience similar to it, but it's completely different. It's now experiencing this 360 moment, but we need to add the layers to it. And then I mentioned to the provost, and then what if you had some type of VR simulation that allows you to now go back and talk to this spouse again in a different type of a medium, if you will. So going from this mixed reality where you're talking to an avatar on a 2D screen to now experiencing this 360 experience of the command team dealing and talking about the situation, and then the flight commander now going back and talking to the spouse in a different type of immersive experience. And I almost call it this layered immersive experiences or layered
Yep.
immersive story. And she was quite interested in that. I said we have some of the pieces, but we have an enterprise. We need an enterprise at the Air University level. Some of these immersive capabilities that we've been testing at the small scale to create these immersive story, this trifecta thing,
Yep.
if you will, of immersive. And all that was an immersive story applied through three kind of different mediums, or we could apply in three different mediums of the same storyline. And she was quite interested, and I'm hopefully we're going to start to move now that that's the first time I've actually been able to speak to the provost of Air University, the one person in charge of all the academics and curriculum for all of Air University, to understand how do we move forward in immersive learning. It really is finding these moments within the Air
Yep.
Force, right, and storylining it through these mediums, right. That makes Air University have more of an immersive approach to adult learning and professional military education here at Air University. I thought she really understood and caught what I was trying to communicate to her. But
So,
that was part of
what's it?
you developed part of that for us, right, through Orchestrate and the 360 videos.
Well, what we're discovering is that there's learning pathways that we can follow, right? That it's just not it's not one and done. Put them in VR,
Right.
right?
Yep.
I'll give you, as we look at extended reality, we have to look at all of our technology, all of our hardware,
Yep.
right? And the most accessible hardware in the world is our phone,
Ah, love it.
right?
Yes.
So our phone needs to be the entry point into this ecosystem.
Yep.
So imagine that we have a classroom experience, traditional classroom learning experience, right? That's around the topic you were just talking about. Look, as a flight commander, you're going to have problems. Your airmen's,
Hmm.
their spouses are going to have challenges, and you're going to have
Yep.
to try to solve those,
Yep.
right? And especially when they're gone, you're going to become de facto them
Mhm.
at some points, right?
Yep.
So, and we care about our people, so this is not an annoyance. This is part of your honorable responsibility,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And let's say there are a handful of terms that they want them to learn, like empathy,
Hmm.
active listening, right?
Right.
There are certain things they want to do. So let's say that happens in the classroom. The next step for me is micro learning with your phone,
Yes.
right? A 5 minute piece is sent to your phone on the Monday. It
Ah,
reminds you of
yes.
the topic. You spend the week practicing some, you know, active listening or whatever their
Yep.
lesson is. And then at the end of the week, it asks you, how did it go?
Yep.
You can give a verbal response. That verbal response now gets recorded and aggregated, and an AI is able to glean all that information. I mean, it can. If it translates it into text, it can put the whole text into a
Yeah.
format and outline the whole thing and all of that, right? So, um, and then the next moment is the AI is the avatar conversation,
Hmm.
right? With
Yep.
the role player, right? These
Yep.
professional role players that have been trained to have the right, personality, the right responses, and
Yes.
that person goes through that, right?
Yep.
Then they go into a 360 moment where a video that is taken a 360 image, right? Where you feel like you're sitting in the room as it surrounds you, and you're experiencing the conversation between the commander and the shirt, right? Um, and the decision that, hey, we're going to bring this guy back, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Hey, let's have a first conversation. Looks like we can probably bring him back. Our guys are just sitting over in Germany. They actually haven't made it over in theater yet, right?
Right.
So let's
Yep.
just bring. Let's just right. So
Right.
and so we're gonna. Why don't you go tell the wife that that's what we're looking at right now? I'm gonna go double check and make sure it's possible. And then your next training moment is a live human being
Oh,
at a house. The
right.
house is disheveled. I
Yep.
mean, it's that really expensive
Yeah.
training moment,
Right. Yep.
right? And it's you go and you knock on the door. Maybe there's a recording of kids screaming or whatever in the back, and she turns, she's like, "Shut up!" Right? You're like,
Right.
hey, everything. You try to calm down the situation. What are the things you need to do to normalize it? What are those training moments? The empathy, the emotional intelligence, the reading of the behavior, assessing the situation, problem
Mhm.
solving in the moment, what to do to best solve that situation, and then actually doing it with another human being,
Yeah.
right? You've
Yes.
had slices of training to
Yep.
contextualize that moment. You've made that moment real,
Right.
right? Like you've made it visceral. You
Yep.
you begin to care about this woman who's in front of you, even though she's a facade of a human being, right? She's a fake. She's
Hmm.
a simulation
Yep.
of a human being, but you care,
Yeah.
and that's what we need to do to create this highest level of training.
Yes.
It is the caring that is what puts the learning off the charts,
Yes.
right?
Love
I
that.
mean, you
Oh,
think of the group of students, the 30 students that sit in class, and you ask each one of them at any point in that hour, how much do you care about this?
right.
Right? You're asking them to care about passive action, right?
Yeah.
Passive activity, passive participation. But when you put people in the moment, one, there's an element of play, there's
Yep.
an element of fun. And if you can activate fun and play, people open up. They're much more empathic. They're much more
Mm.
accessible, right? They care
Yes.
more. They're having a better time. Now, if you have cynics and people who won't play, you can create a level of play that will engage them, and that's competition, right?
Yes.
So you can get people to participate inside of these training moments by making them compete against each other. That will help you with your A personality people who feel
Yeah.
foolish when they're pretending, right?
Right.
Here's the challenge. Once you get somebody competing, it begins to remove empathy because their goal is not to feel and care and listen and learn,
Mm.
it's to win,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yeah. So JJ, this example that you've provided, which you've expanded on my example and added in the micro learning, which I love, and I'm glad you brought that in, and even to a real role play scenario in the end. Um, that approach, I think, is a very cross-disciplinary need of individuals to create this entire experience, right? Which is, I think, which makes immersion a very unique topic, right? As we think about immersion, it's not just the technologist, it's not just the educator. It's somebody who's good at telling a story. It's somebody who's good at understanding environmental development or character development. You also need the instructor that's trying to get to the application of active listening, right? You also so all There's a very cross-disciplinary approach to to the power of immersive learning, which has kind of been, I think, our topic for our overall of our podcast,
Yep.
right? Understanding when we talk about the power of immersive learning, this is a very cross-disciplinary approach as we talk about these things, which I think is hugely important for us to kind of understand, and for those as we talk about this, understand that it's not one person that's going to be able to kind of do this, and that we need to look at this storyline, if you will, and how we create different stories and immerse them in different ways. Is going to require, a collaboration of unique sets of talents and stuff like that are out there that maybe not always have worked together in the past, because you think, make me an immersive experience, and so you pass over to the developer, the coder, or something, or and then you give it to somebody else when really they have to be working side by side the kind of entire time. And really, it's about the story. As because you mentioned, a lot of the technology that we talked about was extremely minimal, right? In your
Yep.
experience of that whole thing, how much of it was technology driven? Or and but the 99% of it was the story, immersing the student into the story through different approaches. I wouldn't even say mediums, approaches, because the
Yep.
mediums is more probably, technology resourcing. And your example of all those four or so experiences, technology was extremely minimal. It was a 360 video, I think, probably at the most, and some of the micro learning, which sits in but that was extremely the smallest part probably of that entire, how to create that immersive, the overall immersive experience of that entire
We
training.
should do it, by the way. We
I
should
know.
build
I
that
agree,
whole
and we have
pipeline.
some of it, and we have some of it. That's why, like, we can. This is a great example because because it's extremely, I would call it, agnostic to the colleges and schools and the level of education. At least here at Air University, the scenario that you gave can be used for my senior airman. It can be used for a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. It could be used for a lieutenant all the way to a colonel in the Air Force, because that same scenario is all of us in the Air Force are going to find us in some point or fashion of you're going to be in charge of at least one person once you get past, once you get to a senior airman, and once you're a lieutenant, which is what you come into the Air Force, you're going to have at least one person underneath you. And there you go, right? The practice of humanity to act upon people, right? And if I can create this immersive storyline that weaves you through these different moments, um, any of those airmen could execute that. So it doesn't sit just
Yep.
for captains that are getting a master's degree at Air University. It's for airmen that's at Barksdale Air Force Base that's going through Airman Leadership School, right? And stuff like. And so, yeah, a massive approach to, I think, that storyline, which we've built a few of it, right? We have some of the pieces.
Yep.
You've helped us build some of it. We need to bring in the micro part of it. I'd love to storyline this, and that's why when I talked this to the provost at Air University, it really was my example of, like, all the things we've been talking about immersion. It really is like trying to get Air University and the dean of Air University to understand that really the immersive learning isn't us just throwing technology into Air University, into these colleges and schools. It's how do we create these immersive experiences, and maybe we should term it the immersive storytelling, the immersive storylines,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, you know what I love about, what you've been saying is that we're really bringing together our scientists and our artists,
Yeah. Yep.
right? To be able to build together these experiences, but in these sandboxes like
Yes.
Orchestrate VR, right? Or, with these companies like Moth and Flame, you don't even need to be the computer scientist. You don't need to be the professional role player or the director or the professional writer, right? We've created these worlds that allow you to build life as you see it,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
And that's what is essential, right?
Yep.
Is allowing the subject matter expert, whether they're a subject matter expert in knitting or a subject matter expert in human behavior or psychology, right? Or training or mechanics, um, allowing that person to experience the life from whatever point of view you need from them at that moment,
Right.
right? Because sometimes you want emotion in that point of view, sometimes you don't. I'll give you an example. I was doing a training with an NGO, and they were training. There's a simulation center here in Virginia, and they train personnel to go over to foreign countries and serve in embassies,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And so they were teaching them triage, right? And then they put them through a large simulation where the embassy is being attacked, and they've got all these mechanical. I call them dummies. What are they? Um,
Oh,
uh, you know,
yeah.
uh, uh, uh,
The
like mannequins, right?
medical scenes.
And they're robotic and they're bleeding and they're pumping up
Yes.
blood and people are shoving tissues in
Yep.
and so they're triaging, these this over throughout the situation. Well, meanwhile they're under attack, and so I amped up the attack because I showed up and I was like, this is ridiculous. There's the attack, the behavior of the role players, it's so non-based in reality.
Mm.
Let's up this. So we did, right? And what do you think happens? Now the people that are supposed to be focusing on learning triage are so overwhelmed
Yeah.
they can't do that level of the work. So in that stage of the work,
Mm.
to overwhelm them was counterproductive
Yes.
to the where they needed to focus. We need a little distraction to let them know this was
Mm.
happening,
Mm.
right? But what I created was a cognitive overload for them,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Right? That they were their fear factor, that intensity. So that what that says to us is okay. We need to repetitively do the straight triage a handful of times before we start to add the adrenaline to the situation.
Yep. I love that. So, and we'll talk about this, I think, in another podcast. Right, going into that flow theory, right, when you added the extra stimuli into that experience, and it caused an
Cognitive overload.
cognitive overload, right? So it created probably anxiety, right, for the participants, right? So the immersion that we did, the stimuli that we brought in was we'll say too much, or wasn't the right type of immersion, and because of that, the student didn't was not in flow, right, or this in the right affective state of mind to be able to execute the cognitive learning moments, the cognitive part of their brain to
Yep.
do those things. And so so I think it's interesting when we look at flow later and we talk about this affective state of mind. So this model of flow theory, right? It really stems back to the story immersion.
Yep.
The type of immersion is going to help you ensure you're in the right state of flow, or that the student, the participants, is in that state of flow, so they can execute, operate the cognitive skills that you're trying to get after, because you've created the correct affective state of mind, so the cognitive state of mind can be executed correctly within the student, right? It all is interconnected, but it comes back to this immersion, creating the right appropriate amount of immersion, the right appropriate amount of story, right? To whatever level, and that level can be used, can come from all kinds of stimuli, right? Whether it's the storyline or the environmental factors, the individual factors we bring in, the technology factors we bring in, all these things, right?
The human factors from human
Human
to human
factors.
relationship. Yep.
Yep, and it ties, so it hits that flow theory, and that all comes back to the camel model. The first part of the camel model, that cognitive affective model for immersive learning, is the technological factors. That's just one part of it. So camel focuses on the technology part, but what we're saying also is the story, the other aspects of immersion, not just the technological factors, is going to influence that flow, right? So
Yep.
this is also connected, but brings us right back to immersion, that right that you talk about, which is story. How do we create that story? Oh, oh,
That's what I'm excited about us
yep,
continuing to talk about, my brother.
yeah,
And so this is our first time together,
yep,
putting, recording ourselves and seeing what we talked through, and hopefully we've created something interesting today, my brother. I know for
yeah,
me, I'm really excited about doing this with you. Every time we get together, I learn. Um,
yep.
and so,
So true.
it's really important for anybody listening to know that, we're not really up here, setting out an agenda so much as sharing, an opportunity, our conversation with you guys,
Yes,
and then inviting you to participate. Please, share your own thoughts with us. And Andy and I are out here building this, each day, right? We build these things. So if you want to participate with us, please know that we both believe that knowledge is best when it's shared.
absolutely. Yep. Thank you, JJ, so much. Super appreciate it. I can't wait for us to dive into our next topic in the next few days. But this has been truly um, empowering to get to connect with you and talk about something that we're both passionate about, which is this understanding of immersion. So thank you, and we will continue this conversation as we move into our other topics. But I'm sure immersion will come up again, and even some of our other topics that we bring up. But again, thanks, JJ. Super appreciate and glad we get to connect and hopefully share moments and thoughts and knowledge with others, and they will share with us as well.
Right on. Adios, brother.
All right, we're stopped recording. Cool. That was
Excellent.
1 hour and 50 minutes. All right, so now I got to say, okay, view recording. So this is the first time I've seen what Riverside will do for us. So now it says I can view recordings. I'm just gonna hit it just to see what it does. Um, it's gonna roll it. Okay, cool. It's processing it. Cool.
So, and the process